Croeso ein all, welcome back to my channel Tales from Wales and the Great Beyond. Welsh place names hold just as much historical importance as the structures or buildings themselves. This is because there is a cultural significance from the tales and stories from which the place names originate. Today we will be travelling back in time to the early Middle Ages of Wales, specifically to another village in the heart of the Vale of Glamorgan. We will be exploring the origins of the village called St. Tathan. Before discussing St. Tathan, however, I will discuss a brief overview of the lives of saints. The book of the Welsh saints is known as Vitae Sanctorum Cambriae, and in Welsh they're known as Becheddau'r Saint. The Lives of Saints is a collection of medieval texts that detail the lives of Welsh saints. According to much advanced research, including in the University of Wales, these texts were produced around the 11th and 12th centuries. Then, by the 13th century, the process of translating them into Welsh began, and these biographies of saints are known as Hagiographies. Part of the purpose of the lives of saints was to foster a sense of local identity and religious devotion within Wales. These stories became more significant and more prominent in Welsh culture when the stories themselves were translated into Welsh. The miracles in these hagiographies and the way in which the saints lived their lives promoted faith and devotion among readers by highlighting the saints' piety and exemplary life. The lives of saints also includes details about the feast days of various Welsh saints. Feast days were determined by the church or local traditions, often based on the saints' death anniversaries or significant events in their lives. As a result, through the lives of saints, there are many types of motifs that appear throughout the hagiographies. For example, martyrdom, prayer and miracles, healing and protection, and asceticism and sacrifice. And we will return to these motifs later in the video. St. Tathan's story begins in Ireland, being the son of an Irish king, but another theory suggests that he is actually the son of Annwn Ddu and Anna, daughter of the Glamorgan king, King Meurig. If this theory were true, this would put St. Tathan in a very regal position, making him the brother-in-law of King Arthur, and the brother of St. Samson, and even the nephew of St. Illtyd himself. Legend has it that Tathan travelled up the River Severn following the advice of an angel. He travelled to Porthskewirt in Gwent, now Monmouthshire, by boat from Ireland. In the 6th century he trained in Llanilltyd in religious teachings, before founding his own church nearby in a parish which was called Llandathan. From there, Tathan founded a monastic school named Cor Tathan in Caerwent, Gwent, and this was built upon a Roman bath site. It was here that King Gwynllyw of Gwynllwg sent his 7-year-old son, Cadocm. Among his associations with founding churches in Cornwall, Scotland and Brittany, Cadocm went on to found Llancarvan, which was another prominent centre for religious learning. Tathan was described as the father of all Gwent and a defender of the woodland country. Tathan was also described as never angry, and he was generous and hospitable to all. Because of his connection with Gwent and with the Vale of Glamorgan, there is some dispute over where Tathan actually died. Some say it was in Caerwent where he had his monastery, but after his time with Illtyd, he also founded the monastery of Llandathan, and some suggest that he actually returned from Gwent to here to die. St. Tathan actually has 2 feast dates. One is the 26th of December and the other is the 30th of December. However, the death of St. Tathan's location could be being muddled up with another saint, St. Tathana. In Terry Breverton's book, The Secret Vale of Glamorgan, he suggests that it isn't actually St. Tathan that founded the village. Instead, he refers to a piece of evidence found by another scholar regarding St. Tathana. The article was written in 1924 by Augusta Jenkins, who was the wife of the vicar of St. Tathan at the time. This evidence alludes to the idea that it was actually St. Tathana who founded Llantathan. St. Tathana's story is a rather tragic one and brings in some of the motifs that we were discussing previously. Her tale begins at Breverton Castle, with Breverton previously being called Breverton, the perfect town. And at this point of her story, her name was not Tathana, but actually Browst. Also at this point, we are going to return to the King Meirig, who we discussed earlier. In this version, when Meirig was dying, his sons and daughters gathered round his bedside, and so did his grandchildren by his daughter Anna, and one of these grandchildren was Browst. Meirig feared for Browst's safety because of a kinship with a knight named Isted Farchog. Before he died, Meirig ensured that Browst went to live with her great-grandfather Gugan, who ruled over Bath at the time. Browst travelled by water and set sail from Aberthaw and went along to Bristol, then on to Bath. Along the way, before getting to Bath, Browst met an Irishman who she fell madly in love with. His name was Dermot, and he was the cupbearer of Gugan. Tensions with the Saxons began to grow, and Gugan wished for peace, so he did so by offering Browst as a bride to a Saxon prince. Eventually a riot broke out, led by Dermot, and in the confusion he managed to escape, and with him he brought Browst. Though Browst had no desire to marry the Saxon prince, and she did indeed love Dermot, this story does not have a happy ending. Browst and Dermot did get married, but when she was pregnant, he abandoned her. All Dermot left her with was a bronze amulet that she wore around her wrist, and this becomes a key component for the next part of the story. Browst gave birth to a son who she named Conan, and he was born with a peculiar birthmark identical to his father's. Prior to his departure, Dermot told Browst that this was a sign of kingship. The story goes that Browst travelled back to Wales with her son, across the River Havren, known as the River Severn, to Caerwent, where, of course, Tathan was rumoured to be buried. Browst was blessed because she was visited by Tathan himself, who appeared to her as a vision, and this is a common motif among hagiographies. Tathan told Browst to live a holy life and to follow his example, to help the poor and the pilgrims. She travelled south back towards Cowbridge, and on her way she met the Archbishop of Caerleon, who blessed her, and from here she continued to Cowbridge and to Llantwit, where her uncle, Prince Frioch, granted her a villa in Llantwit Major. Browst remained in Llantwit Major for another 16 years, and this is where she brought up her son. And in honour of St. Tathan coming to her in a vision, she changed her name to Tathana. Though Tathana kept her word and looked after the poor and the pilgrims, her son, however, became a lawless man. Conan and a group of fellow Irishmen stole the keys to the great gate of Llanilltyd and allowed the Irish pirates in to pillage Llantwit Major. Conan committed a terrible deed. He cut off the hands of his own mother, Tathana, and took her rings and the bracelet that his father gave her, the amulet on her wrist. Conan and his fellow men retreated and escaped back to Ireland. In the raids, Tathana's own villa was destroyed, and in its place a mud hut was built at Pont Newydd in the Reeds. Pure water sources such as a well or holy wells is often an indication that a saint has lived in that area, and in this case there is a well not far from East Orchard, which is very close to the River Thaw, and this is meant to be associated with where Tathana used to live. As for Conan, he travelled back to Ireland and he killed his father Dermot, who became king, and so now he was king. However, during Conan's reign, famine stretched across Ireland, and Conan's own people, his own followers, turned against him. He retreated back to Wales, to Glamorgan, to Aberthaw, but his men turned against him and tied him to a stake. Conan was placed in the middle of the River Thaw, which is a tidal river. Fortunately for Conan, or so he thought, this part of the river just so happened to go past his mother's hut. In a desperate bid to help her son, Tathana rowed her coracle out to him, and when she got there he asked her to untie him. But of course, because of Conan's wicked deeds, Tathana only had stumps where arms should be, from when Conan robbed his mother and maimed her. Tathana looked at her son, who was wearing the amulet that he robbed from her, and bearing his father's same birthmark, and Tathana in that moment forgave her son. Perhaps she did this because in that moment she knew they were going to die, because the story tragically concludes with the coracle being hit by a wave, and both mother and son perish together beneath the waves. Tathana's body was recovered from the river, and villagers took her to the village and was buried at St. Tathan's church. It does feel a shame to question the validity of such a great tragic story that rivals Shakespeare or anything written in Greece, but it is worth reflecting on the historical elements of this story in order to consider whether it is valid or just a legend. Themes such as forgiving those who have wronged them, and prayers at the end of life, as well as martyrdom, are all elements and formulaic of the lives of saints. And as mentioned previously, these are motifs found very commonly in other hagiographies. Therefore, considering this tale was written several hundred years before Tathana died, is this a true account of her life? Or was her tale made up of a formula that was often used as a blueprint for virtues that the Church wished their community to be inspired by and to follow? This concludes the story of Saint Tathan and Saint Tathana. Now we move on to my favourite part of the video, the legends, the myths and the ghost stories. This story does not include the saints, however it does take part in St. Tathan and East Orchard Castle. This is a tale that is well known in these areas of the Vale of Glamorgan and takes part in the areas of St. Tathan. And this story is the legend of the White Lady. Around where the air base is in St. Tathan is the remains of West Orchard Castle, and this story involves West Orchard Castle as well as East Orchard Castle, which is found near the River Thaw. Sir Jasper of West Orchard Castle married Lady de Clare, who was the daughter of the Lord of Glamorgan. The de Clares were a big Norman family who were part of Wales during the early medieval period. Jasper went off to fight in the Crusades in 1148. Upon his return, Jasper heard and believed the rumours that suggested that his wife had been having an affair during his absence. This alleged affair had been with none other than Sir Gilbert, who was the owner of East Orchard Castle. Though Lady de Clare denied the affair, Jasper did not believe her, and in a fit of rage he ordered her to be buried alive along the old road of West Orchard Castle. This was no ordinary burial. Her head was still sticking out of the ground, and he threatened and forbade anyone to help her, including to bring food or water. However, her sister was granted permission to go and visit her in the mornings, and as she did so, she would walk along the grass with her long flowing dress soaking up the morning dew. Carefully and secretly, Lady de Clare would suck the hem of her sister's dress, which provided just enough water to keep her alive for several more days. Only after Lady de Clare died did Jasper accept and finally admit that he was wrong about the alleged affair. But of course, by this point it was far too late, and Sir Jasper was riddled with guilt. Finally, Jasper was driven mad by his guilt as a result of this unnecessary crime against his wife. Those who live near West Orchard Castle, where Lady de Clare died, or even the Air Force Base, have said to have seen a lady in white. She is often seen early hours in the morning around the grass, walking around in a circular motion. Perhaps this is the spirit of Lady de Clare, or perhaps her sister in search of Lady de Clare. We have finally come to the end of the video, and we have learnt all about St. Tathan and his peaceful life here in the Vale, and how his visitation inspired the young Brewis to change her name to Tathana and live a peaceful and loving life like he did, possibly founding Llandathan itself, and even martyred herself to ensure that her son, despite his wrongdoings towards her, would be forgiven before entering heaven. We have also learnt that, like many areas in Wales, St Tathan also has its own dark past. Diolch am wrando. Thanks for listening.